Picture the flounciest, most flamboyantly dressed man in British television standing inside one of the most famous buildings on the planet and coming away thinking it smells a bit like an aging seaside hotel. That's roughly where we're starting today. Laurence Llewelyn-Bowen, yes, the changing room's Laurence, the velvet jacket, cravat-wearing interior design legend, has just given his honest, unfiltered verdict on Buckingham Palace, and it is not what you'd expect from a man whose entire career has been built on reverence for beautiful old buildings. But that's only the opening act, because in the same conversation he also weighed in on Meghan Markle's brief, turbulent time as a working royal, comparing her expectations to something out of a Disney film. And then, almost as a footnote, he said something rather touching about King Charles that had nothing to do with jokes at all. So what exactly did he say about the palace? Why does he think Meghan misunderstood the job before she'd even started it? And why did this outrageously funny interview suddenly turn quite moving toward the end? Let's get into it. Before we do, if you enjoy thoughtful, properly sourced royal family coverage and you haven't subscribed yet, I'd really appreciate it if you joined us. It takes 2 seconds and genuinely helps this channel keep making this kind of content. Let's start with the headline-grabbing bit, because it's the sort of comment that makes you sit up. Speaking to Heat magazine, Laurence Llewelyn-Bowen described a recent visit to Buckingham Palace and didn't hold back. According to his comments, the building, once a space of real grandeur, now strikes him as having faded, comparing the atmosphere to a slightly tired old hotel rather than a working royal residence. It's the kind of line you'd expect from a sitcom review, not a description of the monarch's official London home. And coming from him specifically, it lands differently than it would from almost anyone else. Here's why that matters. This isn't some random pundit taking a cheap shot at the institution for clicks. Laurence Llewelyn-Bowen has spent 30 decades building a reputation as one of Britain's most recognisable authorities on interiors and design. A man who, on changing rooms, could turn a beige box room into a jewel-toned fantasy in 48 hours flat. If anyone in British public life is qualified to render a verdict on the state of a historic building's decor, it's probably him. So when he says Buckingham Palace has lost some of its shine, that's not idle gossip, that's closer to an expert opinion, even if it's delivered with his trademark theatrical flourish. But here's where things become interesting, because he didn't just criticise, he also, in classic Llewelyn-Bowen fashion, suggested the place could do with one of his own redesigns, which, if you know anything about his aesthetic, all rich colour, dramatic drapery and maximalist flair, is a genuinely fun image to sit with. Buckingham Palace reimagined by the man who once turned ordinary suburban living rooms into indoor jungles and Regency fantasies. Whether the royal household would ever take him up on it is safely another question entirely. That's only part of the story, though, because the interview didn't stay on interiors for long. Llewelyn-Bowen also turned his attention to Meghan Markle's short-lived stint as a working member of the royal family, and here his tone shifted from cheeky critique of a building to something a little sharper. His suggestion, roughly summarized, was that the Duchess of Sussex arrived with expectations shaped more by fairy tale than by reality, as though she'd stepped into a glossy Hollywood version of royal life rather than the genuinely demanding, highly scrutinized institution it actually is. It's a comparison that's been made before by other commentators in slightly different forms, but the specific way he framed it, genuine princess movie logic meeting the actual machinery of the British monarchy, is a memorably vivid way of putting it. Now, it's worth pausing here because this is exactly the kind of comment that can tip from sharp opinion to unfair character judgment if we're not careful. So let's be precise about what this actually is. One interior designer's personal take on how Meghan may have imagined royal life versus how it turned out. It isn't a documented fact about her state of mind, and there's no way for Llewelyn-Bowen or anyone outside that marriage and that institution to know for certain what she expected walking in. It's an opinion offered by someone with no particular royal expertise beyond having appeared on television and, more recently, hosting a royal history podcast. Entertaining, certainly. Authoritative on Meghan's inner life, not remotely. And this is the detail that almost everyone commenting on this story overlooked, because right after that dig, in the very same conversation, Llewelyn-Bowen said something that reframes the entire interview, something with genuine warmth in it. He turned to the subject of the ongoing estrangement between Prince Harry and the wider family, and specifically to how it might be affecting King Charles, and rather than making another joke, he got surprisingly reflective. He noted that although he lives fairly close to the king geographically, Charles keeps his private feelings closely guarded on this subject, which, fair enough, is more or less true of every senior royal on every sensitive topic. But Llewelyn-Bowen went on to say he suspected it must be a source of real sadness for Charles not to have easy, everyday access to his son and his grandchildren, and then, speaking as a grandfather himself, he added that he couldn't imagine going a day without seeing his own grandchildren, even, as he put it with real affection, his silly, foolish, flighty ones. Yet something else quietly happened in that moment. A conversation that started as a fairly cheeky celebrity interview insulting the smell of a palace comparing Meghan to a Disney princess suddenly became something closer to genuine empathy for an elderly man who, whatever his position and title, is simply missing his family. That's a tonal swing worth noticing because it's rare. Most royal commentary picks a lane and stays in it, either mockery or reverence. Llewelyn-Bowen, in the space of a few minutes, managed both, and it somehow worked. Which brings us to perhaps the more interesting question sitting underneath all of this. Why does a man best known for wallpaper and swagged curtains have this platform to comment on the royal family at all? And the answer, it turns out, says something about how royal media coverage has evolved over the last few years. Llewelyn-Bowen now hosts a podcast for True Royalty TV, a streaming platform dedicated almost entirely to royal content, everything from historical documentaries to lighter, more conversational formats. He's positioned himself somewhat unexpectedly as a recurring voice in royal commentary, discussing royal history and royal palaces specifically, which does actually connect back to his professional expertise in architecture and interiors rather more directly than you might first assume. So the Buckingham Palace comments in particular aren't really a celebrity wandering off topic, they're closer to his actual lane. That's worth remembering because it explains why an interior designer's opinion on a royal residence carries a bit more weight than, say, a reality TV contestant's opinion on foreign policy would. He's not just any celebrity guest lobbing a one-liner. He's someone who has built, quite deliberately, a secondary career around exactly this subject. And this changes the entire conversation around that Fawlty Towers comment specifically, because it's easy to read a line like that as pure comic exaggeration, and to be fair, it almost certainly is, at least partly, but it's also a professional interior designer's genuine reaction to seeing a historic building he clearly still cares about looking, in his view, a little tired.
Having met as teenagers, long before any of the television fame arrived, he's been remarkably candid over the years about how central she's been to his career, describing her as the driving force behind pretty much everything he's achieved on screen. And the two of them clearly still enjoy each other's company enormously, Jin included, by his own cheerful admission. That detail matters more than it might seem because it colours how you read his comments about Charles and family. This is a man who spent nearly 38 years building a life with the same partner, who talks about his own family with obvious warmth and humour. When he says it would break his heart not to see his grandchildren daily, that's not a throwaway royal watcher soundbite. That's coming from someone who's genuinely oriented his entire adult life around close family relationships. It gives his sympathy for Charles's situation a bit more texture than if it had come from someone with no particular track record of prioritising family closeness. There's a lighter thread running through the interview too, which is worth mentioning, if only because it's genuinely funny. Jackie, it turns out, has apparently banned him from any further reality television stunts, following his rather alarming experience on the Netflix survival series Celebrity Bear Hunt, during which, under Bear Grylls' guidance, he ended up needing rescue after passing out beneath an overturned raft in Costa Rica. His own description of the experience is a small comic masterpiece. He went in imagining himself as James Bond and came out, in his words, feeling more like a cartoon pig than a secret agent. He said he loved the whole experience despite very nearly dying during it, which tells you a lot about his general approach to life: enthusiastic, slightly reckless, entirely unbothered by dignity. He's apparently even been banned from attempting the Great British Bake Off tent, joking that he can't be trusted around a simple cherry on top of a cake without some kind of minor disaster unfolding. It's a small, silly detail, but it fits the picture that's emerging here. A man who takes his opinions seriously, but never takes himself too seriously, which might be exactly why his royal commentary lands the way it does. He's not performing solemn authority, he's just telling you what he genuinely thinks, jokes and tenderness both included. Away from the palace gossip and the Bear Grylls near miss, there's also a quieter, more personal side to this story worth touching on. Llewelyn-Bowen and his family have lived since 2007 in a 17th century Grade II listed manor house in the Gloucestershire village of Siddington, which notably places him fairly close to Highgrove, King Charles's own Gloucestershire estate. That's likely part why he framed his comment about Charles the way he did, referencing physical proximity even while acknowledging the emotional distance the king maintains around anything to do with Harry. He's spoken warmly elsewhere about nearby Cirencester too, describing it as a town built around genuine entrepreneurial spirit, independent restaurants, craft businesses and startups, rather than the more manicured celebrity culture that's crept into other corners of the Cotswolds over the years. He's pointed visitors towards the Corinium Museum, with its Roman-era mosaics and artefacts telling the story of Cirencester's ancient history, and towards the Barn Theatre as one of the area's cultural highlights. It's a small window into a man who, for all his television flamboyance, has built a genuinely rooted, unpretentious life in one corner of rural England. So, pulling all of this together, what do we actually take away from one interior designer's chat with Heat magazine? On one level, it's exactly what it looks like, a colourful, quotable celebrity interview full of one-liners about smelly carpets and Disney princesses. But underneath that, there's a genuinely thoughtful moment about a father who, according to widespread reporting over the past few years, has had a painfully limited relationship with one of his sons and grandchildren. And there's a reminder that royal commentary doesn't always come from royal correspondents or historians. Sometimes it comes from the unlikeliest of places, delivered with a wink and a surprising amount of heart. I'd love to know what you think. Was the Fawlty Towers jab fair criticism from someone who genuinely knows interiors, or a step too far for a building with that much history behind it? And did his comments about Meghan feel like harmless observation to you, or a little too pointed? Let me know in the comments below. I read every one of them. If you've enjoyed this and you'd like more royal family coverage that takes the time to look past the headline and into the actual nuance, I'd love for you to subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel keep making content like this. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.